Hi, everyone. I hope you've had a relaxing break. We're back with Bytesize and have an exciting set of talks lined up for you this semester. But first, I'd like to begin by thanking our funders, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, for making this series and NF Core outreach events possible. So this new season of Bytesize will include a special set of Bytesize talks that will focus on pipelines, and these will be presented by the developers themselves. So check out our events page to stay up to date. And speaking of pipelines, let's port them to DSL2. Sign up to participate in our next hackathon happening virtually between October 27th and 29th. Many of you have already registered in the last 10 days, and some of you have even helped sign up to organize. So you'll be hearing from us soon. Now, without further ado, let's move on to today's talk. Gisela Gabernet from the core team based at Cubic at the University of Tübingen in Germany will talk about AWS Megatests and how to set them up in your NF Core pipeline. Gisela's talk will be followed by a short Q&A. So if you have any questions for her during today's talk, please add them to the chat box on Zoom or on YouTube, and I will read them out at the end. So thank you very much for joining us today, Gisela. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Renuka, for this introduction. And yeah, I'd like to present today how to set up AWS Megatests, which are basically real-sized automated NF Core pipeline tests. So first of all, let's start off by, I wanted to start with explaining a bit how continuous integration tests as part of the NF Core pipelines work. So for continuous integration, we use GitHub Actions, which is a service directly provided by GitHub. And basically in the service, they provide a series of worker instances in which one can run certain continuous integration tasks. And as part of NF Core pipelines, we have several GitHub action workflows that define which tasks should be run for continuous integration. You can see them listed here. So just mentioning them very briefly, one of them is the branch GitHub action, which takes care of the branch protection of the master branch in the NF Core pipeline repository. So this one makes sure that pull requests coming from outside repositories are only made to the dev branch of the NF Core repository and not to the master branch. Then we also have a GitHub Actions workflow that runs the pipeline tests. So it makes sure that the different test profiles that are added as part of the pipeline run through before integrating pull requests, for example. And then we have a couple of linting workflows. One linting workflow runs the NF Core linting tests, but also other code linting commands, for example, Markdown linting for all Markdown files, YAML linting, and there are now some additional ones like editor config that lint for trailing white spaces and that the indentation is fine for all of the files, things like that. And finally, the linting comment GitHub Actions workflow basically posts as a comment to the pull request the linting results. But today I'm going to focus on two special GitHub Action workflows, the AWS full test workflow, which runs the full size test on AWS Batch, and the AWS test workflow, which runs the small test data on AWS. So first of all, why did we add those AWS batch tests as part of all the NF Core pipelines? The first reason, of course, was that to test that all the NF Core pipelines can be actually ported to AWS Batch and run there without issues. But also because we wanted to test all the NF Core pipelines with full size data. So the GitHub action runners that I've mentioned before have the limitation that when using them in the free version, at least, they have CPU, memory, and time limits that don't allow running pipelines with full size data, but rather just with a small test data set. So to run pipelines with full size data, one needs to use different infrastructure. And one of the possibilities is using AWS Batch run those tests. Some additional advantages of having this AWS batch test set up is that we can then display on the NFCo website example results of each of the NFCo pipelines running on full-size data. And additionally, we can also check that between the different releases, the results, the pipeline results remain stable when that's desired. So how are those AWS batch tests actually running? So originally we set them up directly on AWS using some cloud for. So originally we set up the whole AWS infrastructure that is necessary to run those tests directly using CloudFormation templates that are provided by docs.opendata.aws. You can see the link below. And we just needed to do some adaptations, and those CloudFormation templates basically created all of the AWS infrastructure necessary for running. So the batch queues, the compute environments, all of the roles, basically everything that is necessary on AWS BatchSize to run those tests. However, recently, Tower by Segera has launched Tower Forge, which basically sets up automatically all of the infrastructure that is needed to run Nextflow pipelines on AWS Batch. So we have now migrated and are using also Tower Forge to set up all of the infrastructure that is needed to run those pipeline tests. So how does the workflow look at the moment? We have a GitHub Actions trigger, and this trigger basically then runs the GitHub Actions workflow that I'm going to show afterwards. And this workflow basically submits the pipeline job using Tower launch to AWS Batch. And the pipeline runs on AWS Batch, pulls the necessary data from the S3 bucket, and publishes also the results from the S3 bucket that we have set up on AWS. And while this is running, we can also monitor the progress of the runs with Nextflow Tower. And in the end, when the pipeline run has finished, we basically retrieve the results from the S3 bucket and can display them on the NFCo website. So how is this defined in the GitHub Actions workflow? This is an example of the NFCo AWS full-size test GitHub Actions workflow for the viral recon pipeline. And as you can see, here's a definition that it says that the workflow should be triggered on any release, but it's also possible to trigger it via a workflow dispatch button, which I'm going to show you afterwards. And basically what it does, it just submits the pipeline run to using the Tower API. And originally we were basically calling directly roughly the Tower API here, but that was quite cumbersome because we had to escape some quotes, and it was a pain of combination of curly brackets and quotes and escapes. So Phil actually wrote a Tower action that allows us to basically call the Tower API via a Tower action and provide all of the input parameters here as a nice YAML format, which really facilitates submitting jobs via Tower. And this action can also be used outside of NFCo pipeline, so feel free to try it out if you want to submit automatically jobs to AWS using Tower. So here you can see all the parameters that are needed to run the jobs, and most of them, we have them stored in secrets as part of GitHub. And here could be like the pipeline parameters themselves and the profiles that are used for running the pipeline. So actually you don't need to modify absolutely anything of this GitHub action workflow. This is already set up for you when you use the NFCo template, so that should not be modified. And the only that you need to adapt is the test full profile here. So this is the profile that it will be run on AWS for the full test profiles. And it needs to be adapted so that all of the necessary parameters to run the pipeline on the full size data are set here, including the input sample sheet or passed with the input data that you are using. And yeah, and for the input sample sheet, this one can be set as part of the pipeline repository, but it can also be already directly staged on our NF Core AWS Megatests S3 bucket, and the path directly provided here. So let's summarize exactly what you need to do to set up AWS full-size tests for your pipeline. First of all, of course, you need to find the full-size data that is suitable for your pipeline. If you don't have any yet, you can go to the SRA or INA repositories and search for suitable data for your analysis. Here, Phil wrote a tool as well, SRA Explorer, that allows you to search data on SRA with some keywords that can be useful for finding this data. And second, you need to get the data. And actually, the SRA Explorer also provides download links, but otherwise you can also check out the NF Core Fetch NGS pipeline that allows you to download data from SRA or INA, just providing the identifiers. And second, in principle, it would be possible to just provide the FTP links to this data on SRA, for example, on the sample sheet. But we have seen that sometimes there are some issues by staging directly this data. So the most reliable solution is that you can then ask a core team member to basically stage your data directly on the AWS Megatests bucket. You can also ping me anytime for that on the NF Core Slack. And we will then upload this data to S3, and you can then add the paths of the data in S3 in your sample sheet for the full test profile. Yeah, sorry, I just mentioned this. Then you can add the paths to the data on the sample sheet and link the sample sheet path to the test full profile, as I showed before in the slide before. And basically that's it. That's as simple as this. The AWS GitHub Actions workflow is automatically then already triggered on every release. You don't need to modify that workflow. And in case you want to test it before a release, you can also just trigger a test using the workflow dispatch button. But let's see how this works actually in practice. So let's do a short live demo. We'll take for that the NF Core vital recon pipelines that already has some full-size tests set up. And as I mentioned before, I mean, this will be triggered automatically on release. You don't need to do anything for that. But in case you want to test it once with this workflow dispatch event, you can go to the Actions tab of the pipeline repository. And here you will see basically all the Actions workflows. So we have the AWS full-size tests and the AWS tests. Because, of course, running pipelines on AWS still is a bit expensive. So we do pay money to be able to run those tests. I'm going to just try out the small tests for now. So here you can see then because there is a workflow dispatch event, you can see a run workflow button here that can be triggered on any of the branches that are available in the repository. So let's select the dev branch here, and we'll start running the workflow. So what this does, and this takes a couple of seconds to start basically, is it triggers this GitHub Actions workflow that is submitting the job to Tower. Let's hope it appears now. The workflow was successfully requested, so it should appear here any second. But yeah, well, maybe it takes a bit this time, but I just triggered one yesterday, so I can show you nevertheless how the results are running, how the pipeline is running. So what if we want to monitor the run now? Now it appeared here as well. What if we want to monitor the run now? You can go to Nextflow Tower, and we have there NF Core organization and also the AWS Megatest workspace. So in case you're a pipeline developer and you want to follow how your pipeline runs are running, please also get in contact to a core team member, and we can add you to this workspace so you can follow basically all of the running workflows at the moment. So let's have a look here. We can see for the run that we've just triggered, it takes quite a while, so we will not wait for it now. But basically, you will see here how the jobs are submitted to AWS, which jobs are running, and when they are succeeded. If we have a look at the run that I triggered yesterday, basically everything ran through perfectly. And you can also see afterwards the resource allocation for each of the processes of the pipeline there. So once these automated runs are done for each release, we also display them on the NFCo website. So for each of the pipeline pages on the NFCo website, there's a results tab where you can basically see all the pipeline results, and you can even have a look at, for example, the multi-QC reports there on the website. Yeah, but so one thing that we would ask you is that you please don't abuse of this. So it's good to add full size data, but also it shouldn't be lots of samples. It should be just a reasonable, but still small set of full size data. These running data on AWS still incurs cost on us, and we are very happy that AWS provided us with a grant so that they cover the costs of these runs for 1 year to up to a limited amount. So those, for example, are the costs that incurred for this test since September 2020, running all of the NFCo pipelines on AWS. And that's basically it. I'd like to thank everybody that contributed to this. So Rike, Alex, and we were setting this up at the beginning. Matthias basically did the website implementation so that we can show the results on the NFCo website together with Phil. And Phil also set up the GitHub actions so that we can submit in a nicer way the pipelines via Tower. And also thanks very much to James Seward from AWS, who helped us at the beginning a lot for the first setup of these AWS tests. And as Renuka mentioned already, here's a reminder of the next hackathon coming up the 27th to 29th of October. So join us there.
All right, thank you, Gisela. We have a question in the chat from Phil, who asks why we don't use the GitHub integration that's available within Tower.
Good point. I had a look at it once. It was a while ago. And what I saw there is that basically the GitHub integration in Tower runs a workflow for every commit that is happening to a repository. As far as I could see, to be fair, I didn't really investigate into this, but there wasn't back then, I think, a possibility to just trigger those workflow runs on releases and not on every commit that is added to a pipeline repository.
And he also had another comment that I think you've already covered in your talk, but I'll read it out anyway. He says it would be nice to clarify where the money comes for running these AWS jobs.
Yes, the money for these AWS jobs comes from a grant given by AWS. So yeah, we are grateful to them for this grant. So otherwise it would not be possible. Of course, we could not finance running all of these tests there.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? You can just post them in the chat. I don't see any so far on Zoom. Okay, there's one more question from Phil, or a comment. Also, anyone in the NFCo GitHub org, anyone can trigger a workflow without needing access to Tower regarding referring to not using Tower integration.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. That's also an advantage of using the GitHub actions.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions or comments coming up at this point. But you know where to reach Gisela if you have any more questions, and you can keep the discussion going on the Bytesize channel on Slack. That's what it's there for. So thank you again. Please remember that you can find past talks on our YouTube channel and on billybilly.com, and all links are on the events page. So if you fancy rewatching old videos, they're on there for you. We've also shared slide decks on Figshare, and there are transcripts for all the talks that we've had so far. So please feel free to make use of those resources and adapt them to your needs. And we'll be back next week with a bite-sized talk by Evan Floden, and he will take us through Nextflow Tower that was covered in part today by Gisela. So see you then, and thanks very much again. Bye.